The shrill ring of the telephone pierced through our peaceful Sunday afternoon like a knife. I froze, wooden spoon suspended over the simmering pot of chili, my heart suddenly racing. Something in me knew this call would change everything. "Rebecca, honey, can you get that?" Ethan called from the living room, his voice muffled by the football game blaring on TV. I wiped my hands on my apron and rushed to answer. "Hello? Rebecca?" It was Clara, my mother-in-law, her voice tight with worry. "It's Benjamin. He's fallen and broken his hip. We're at the hospital now." My stomach dropped. "Oh no, is he okay? What happened?" As Clara filled me in on the details, I caught Ethan's eye. He must have sensed the tension in my voice because he muted the TV and came to stand beside me, his brow furrowed in concern. "What's going on?" he mouthed. I held up a finger, listening intently as Clara continued. "The doctors say he'll need surgery, and then, well, he can't live alone anymore. We need to figure something out." "Of course," I said, my mind already racing. "We'll be there as soon as we can. Which hospital?" After jotting down the details, I hung up and turned to Ethan. "It's your grandfather. He's broken his hip." Ethan's face fell. "Damn, is he okay?" I quickly relayed what Clara had told me. As I spoke, I could see the wheels turning in Ethan's head, probably already calculating how this would impact our lives. "We should go to the hospital," I said, already moving to turn off the stove. "Can you call your sister? I'll get the kids ready." Ethan nodded, reaching for his phone. "Yeah, I'll let Sarah know. She'll probably want to meet us there." Within 20 minutes we were in the car, our two children, Emma and Jack, unusually quiet in the back seat. As we drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that our lives were about to change dramatically. At the hospital, we found Clara pacing in the waiting room, her normally perfectly coiffed hair disheveled. Sarah arrived moments after us, her husband Tom in tow. "How is he?" Ethan asked, embracing his mother. Clara sighed heavily. "They've taken him into surgery. The doctor said it went well, but—" She trailed off, her eyes filling with tears. I stepped forward, putting a comforting hand on her arm. "But what, Clara? He can't go back to living alone," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's going to need full-time care, at least for a while." The weight of her words settled over us like a heavy blanket. I glanced at Ethan, seeing the same realization dawning in his eyes. Our lives were about to become much more complicated. "We'll figure it out," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "We're family. That's what we do." Sarah nodded in agreement, but I couldn't help noticing the flicker of unease that passed between her and Tom. I pushed the thought aside, focusing on the present moment. As we settled in to wait for news, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that this was just the beginning. Benjamin had always been a strong, independent man. How would he handle this sudden loss of freedom? And how would we, as a family, cope with the challenges ahead? Little did I know, as I sat there in that sterile hospital waiting room surrounded by my family, that this was only the first tremor in what would become an earthquake, shaking the very foundations of our lives. The real test was yet to come, and it would push us all to our limits, revealing truths about ourselves and each other that we never could have imagined. The crash of shattering glass jolted me from my sleep. I bolted upright, heart pounding, and fumbled for my robe. Ethan stood beside me, mumbling groggily. "What was that?" "I'll check," I whispered, already padding down the hallway towards Benjamin's room. I found him standing amidst a sea of broken china, his face flushed with anger. "This blasted tea set!" he bellowed. "It's completely useless." "Grandpa Ben," I said softly, trying to calm him. "What's wrong? Why are you up so late?" His eyes, sharp despite the hour, fixed on me. "I wanted tea, Rebecca. Is that a crime now? But this ridiculous china you insist on using, it's too delicate for a man's hands." I bit back a sigh. It was the china his late wife had cherished, but I didn't dare remind him of that now. "Let me clean this up, and I'll make you some tea in a sturdier mug, okay?" As I swept up the shards, Benjamin launched into a lecture. "In my day, we knew how to make things that lasted, not like this flimsy modern junk. And while we're at it, your entire household could use an overhaul. The way you run things, it's all wrong." I gritted my teeth, reminding myself that his frustration wasn't really about the teacup. It had been 3 weeks since he'd moved in with us, and each day brought new challenges. The once stern but fair man I'd known had become a cantankerous shadow of himself, lashing out at everyone and everything. "I appreciate your input, Grandpa Ben," I said, forcing a smile. "How about we discuss some changes over breakfast tomorrow?" He harumphed, but seemed it slightly. "Fine, but I expect you to listen, Rebecca. There's wisdom in these old bones, whether you young folks want to hear it or not." As I tucked him back into bed, I couldn't help but wonder if there really was some hidden wisdom beneath his harsh words. The rest of the family had grown increasingly impatient with his outbursts, but something told me to keep digging. The next morning, over a breakfast of sturdy mugs and Benjamin's favorite oatmeal, he began his critique. "Your children, Rebecca, they need more discipline. In my day, we knew how to raise respectful youngsters." I saw Ethan's jaw clench from across the table, but I placed a calming hand on his arm. "What do you suggest, Grandpa Ben?" For the next hour Benjamin expounded on everything from our parenting style to our choice of curtains. Some of it was outdated, even offensive, but buried within the rants were nuggets of genuine insight. "You're too soft on them," he growled. "But at least you listen. Unlike some people." His eyes darted to Ethan, who was pointedly ignoring the conversation. As Benjamin continued, I noticed Clara hovering in the doorway, her expression a mix of exasperation and guilt. She caught my eye and quickly retreated, leaving me to wonder about the growing divide I sensed in the family. Later that afternoon, as I was folding laundry, Ethan cornered me in our bedroom. "How can you stand it?" he demanded. "He's impossible." I sighed, setting down a half-folded shirt. "He's struggling, Ethan. This isn't easy for him either." "But the way he talks to you, to all of us, it's not right, Rebecca." I met his gaze steadily. "There's more to it than that, if we just listen." Ethan threw up his hands. "Listen? To what? More complaints and insults? You're being naive, Rebecca. He's not going to change." As he stormed out, I felt a heaviness settle in my chest. The rift I'd sensed was widening, not just between Benjamin and the family, but between Ethan and me. That night, as I lay awake, Benjamin's words echoed in my mind. Beneath the harshness, I'd sensed a desperate need to be heard, to still feel valuable. While the others saw only the prickly exterior, I was beginning to glimpse the vulnerable man underneath. I made a silent vow then. I would keep trying to understand, to find the wisdom hidden in Benjamin's words. Even if it meant standing alone against the tide of family frustration, I wouldn't give up on him. Little did I know, this decision would set in motion a chain of events that would change all our lives forever. I never meant to eavesdrop, but the hushed voices drifting from the kitchen stopped me in my tracks. Clara's unmistakable laugh, tinged with a hint of bitterness, made me pause outside the door. I swear, if I have to listen to Dad complain one more time about how we don't do things the right way, I might just wish him away myself. My breath caught in my throat. I knew Benjamin had been difficult, but to hear Clara speak so callously about her own father. Then came the sound that truly broke my heart, Ethan's deep chuckle joining his mother's laughter. "Maybe we could accidentally book him on a one-way cruise," Ethan joked. "Think he'd notice if we didn't pick him up at the port?" I couldn't bear to hear any more. I burst into the kitchen, my face flushed with anger and disappointment. "How can you two talk like that?" I demanded, my voice shaking. Clara and Ethan jumped, guilt flashing across their faces before quickly morphing into defensive irritation. "Oh, Rebecca," Clara sighed, rolling her eyes. "We were just letting off some steam. You know how Dad can be." I turned to Ethan, hoping to see some remorse in his eyes, but found only annoyance. "It was just a joke, Becca. Lighten up." "A joke?" I repeated, incredulous. "Your grandfather is struggling, Ethan. He needs our support, not this." Ethan's jaw clenched. "You don't get it, do you? He's making everyone miserable. The kids are walking on eggshells. I can barely stand to be in my own home, and you're just enabling him." "Enabling?" I shot back. "I'm trying to understand him, to help him adjust. He's family, Ethan. We can't just wish him away because it's inconvenient." Clara stepped between us, her hands raised placatingly. Now, let's not fight. Rebecca, dear, I know you mean well, but you have to admit Dad's behavior is wearing on all of us." I shook my head, feeling suddenly very alone. "I can't believe what I'm hearing. He raised you, Clara. And Ethan, he's your grandfather. How can you be so callous?" Ethan's eyes flashed with anger. Don't you dare judge us, Rebecca. You're not the one who grew up with his constant criticism, his impossible standards. You don't know what it's like. I know what it's like to care for someone who needs help, I retorted, even when it's hard, even when they push you away. The kitchen fell silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Clara busied herself with the dishes, clearly uncomfortable, while Ethan and I stared each other down. Finally, Ethan spoke, his voice low and controlled. You think you're so noble, don't you? Saint Rebecca, always doing the right thing. Well, let me tell you something. The rest of us are human. We get tired, we get frustrated, and sometimes, yes, we joke about things to cope. If you can't handle that, maybe you're the one with the problem. His words hit me like a physical blow. I stumbled back, tears pricking at my eyes. I can't believe you just said that to me, I whispered. Before either of them could respond, I turned and fled the kitchen. As I ran up the stairs, I could hear Benjamin's gruff voice calling out, asking what all the commotion was about. In our bedroom, I sank onto the bed, my mind reeling. How had things gotten so bad so quickly? The loving family I thought I knew seemed to be crumbling before my eyes. As I sat there, trying to make sense of it all, a terrible realization dawned on me. The discord I'd sensed wasn't just about Benjamin. It was about me, too. Somehow, in trying to do what I thought was right, I'd placed myself on the outside of my own family. A soft knock at the door made me look up. It was Emma, our daughter, her young face creased with worry. Mom? Are you okay? I heard yelling. I forced a smile, patting the bed beside me. As Emma curled up next to me, I held her close, suddenly fiercely grateful for her presence. Whatever was happening with Ethan and his family, I knew one thing for certain: I would do whatever it took to protect my children from the growing storm. Little did I know, the true test of my resolve was yet to come. The hushed voices coming from the living room made my skin prickle. I paused at the bottom of the stairs, my hand gripping the banister as I strained to hear. It was Ethan, Clara, and Sarah, Ethan's sister. A family meeting, and I hadn't been invited. We can't go on like this, Sarah was saying, her voice tight with frustration. It's tearing us apart. I know, Ethan sighed, but what can we do? We can't just abandon Grandpa. Clara's voice cut in, sharp and decisive. We're not abandoning him. We're reallocating resources. My heart began to race. What were they planning? Rebecca seems to have everything under control, Clara continued. She's always so insistent on doing things her way. Well, let her. Mom, Ethan protested weakly, but Clara steamrolled on. I'm telling you, it's for the best. We'll move out, give them space. Rebecca can handle Grandpa, and we can all get our lives back. The silence that followed was deafening. I waited, breath held, for Ethan to object, to stand up for our family. But when he finally spoke, his words shattered my world. Maybe you're right, he said softly. Maybe it is for the best. I stumbled back, my vision blurring with tears. How could they? How could Ethan? Before I could confront them, Benjamin's gruff voice called out from upstairs. Rebecca, where's my tea? Wiping my eyes, I hurried to the kitchen, my mind reeling. As I prepared Benjamin's tea with shaking hands, I tried to make sense of what I'd heard. They were planning to leave us, to leave me, alone with Benjamin. The betrayal cut deep, but beneath the pain, a spark of determination ignited. I carried the tea upstairs, my resolve strengthening with each step. If they thought they could just walk away, they had another thing coming. About time, Benjamin grumbled as I entered his room, but his scowl softened slightly as he saw my face. What's wrong with you? You look like you've seen a ghost. For a moment I considered telling him everything, but the stubborn set of his jaw, so like Ethan's, made me hesitate. Instead, I forced a smile. It's nothing, Grandpa Ben, just a long day. He harumphed, but his eyes narrowed suspiciously. Don't lie to me, girl. I may be old, but I'm not blind. Something's eating at you. I sank into the chair beside his bed, suddenly exhausted. It's Ethan and the others. They're talking about moving out, leaving us to care for you alone. I expected anger, perhaps another lecture about family loyalty. Instead, Benjamin's face crumpled, a vulnerability I'd never seen before shining through. I see, he said softly. Can't say I blame them. I haven't exactly been easy to live with. His admission stunned me. Grandpa Ben, he waved me off. Don't coddle me, Rebecca. I know what I've been like, but you. He reached out, his gnarled hand grasping mine. You've stood by me even when I didn't deserve it. Why? The question caught me off guard. Why had I? Because because I believe there's more to you than just the grumpy old man act. Because family means something to me. And because sometimes the people who push us away are the ones who need us most. Benjamin's eyes glistened with unshed tears. For a long moment he said nothing. Then with a deep breath he squeezed my hand. You're a good woman, Rebecca. Better than this family deserves, maybe. So what are you going to do about those cowards downstairs? His question ignited the spark of determination in me once more. What was I going to do? I stood, squaring my shoulders. I'm going to fight for this family, Grandpa Ben. All of it, even the parts that don't think they want to be fought for. As I left his room, I heard him chuckle. That's my girl, he murmured. Descending the stairs, I steeled myself for the confrontation to come. They thought they could just decide our fate without me? They were about to learn how wrong they were. This wasn't just about Benjamin anymore. It was about the very foundation of our family, and I wasn't going down without a fight. The day Ethan left was the day I truly understood the meaning of heartbreak. I stood in the doorway, watching him load the last of his bags into the car, feeling as if my world was crumbling around me. Emma and Jack clung to my sides, their small faces etched with confusion and hurt. Daddy, why can't you stay? Emma's voice quivered, and I felt my resolve cracking. Ethan knelt down, his eyes avoiding mine. I'm sorry, sweetheart. Daddy just needs some time away, but I'll see you soon, okay? As he hugged our children goodbye, I caught Clara's eye over his shoulder. Her expression was a mix of guilt and defiance, and I felt a surge of anger. This was her doing, her idea of reallocating resources. When Ethan finally turned to me, I saw a flicker of regret in his eyes. Becca, I cut him off, my voice low and steady. Don't, just go. As the car pulled away, I felt Benjamin's presence behind me. Well, he grumbled, good riddance to bad rubbish, I say. I spun around, ready to snap at him, but the words died on my lips when I saw the pain in his eyes. He was hurting too, I realized. We all were. That night, after putting the kids to bed, I sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by bills and paperwork. How was I supposed to manage all this on my own? The weight of responsibility felt crushing. A soft knock interrupted my spiraling thoughts. Mom? Jack peeked around the door, his eyes wide. Is Grandpa Ben okay? He's making weird noises. Alarmed, I rushed upstairs to Benjamin's room. The sound of labored breathing greeted me before I even opened the door. Inside, I found Benjamin hunched over, gasping for air. Grandpa Ben! I cried, rushing to his side. What's wrong? Talk to me. He couldn't speak, just gestured weakly at his chest. My heart racing, I grabbed the phone and dialed 911. The next few hours were a blur of ambulances, emergency rooms, and anxious waiting. As dawn broke, a tired-looking doctor approached me in the waiting room. Mrs. Thompson? Your grandfather-in-law is stable now. It was a severe asthma attack, exacerbated by stress and his recent hip surgery. Relief washed over me, quickly followed by guilt. How had I not known about his asthma? Had we all been so caught up in our own drama that we'd missed something so crucial? When I was finally allowed to see Benjamin, I found him looking small and fragile in the hospital bed. His gruff exterior had crumbled, leaving behind a vulnerable old man. I'm sorry, he whispered as I took his hand. I should have told you about the asthma. Didn't want to seem weak. I shook my head, fighting back tears. No, I'm sorry. We should have been paying closer attention. As we talked, I realized something profound was happening. The walls Benjamin had built up were crumbling, and for the first time, I saw the man beneath, scared, lonely, but with a core of strength that had weathered many storms. When I returned home that afternoon, exhausted but determined, I found Emma and Jack waiting anxiously. Is Grandpa Ben okay? Emma asked, her voice small. I knelt down, gathering them both in my arms. He will be, I assured them, and we're going to help him. Together. Looking into their brave little faces, I felt a surge of love and determination. Ethan and his family might have abandoned us, but we weren't broken. We were survivors. That night, as I tucked the kids into bed, I made a silent vow. We would not just survive this, we would thrive. Benjamin, the children, and I, we would build something new and beautiful from the ashes of what we'd lost. As I closed their bedroom door, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. The road ahead would be challenging, but for the first time since this all began, I felt ready to face it. We were a family. Unconventional, perhaps, but bound by love and resilience, and that I realized was more powerful than any adversity we might face. My hands trembled as I smoothed down my blouse, stealing a glance at Benjamin in the passenger seat. 6 months had passed since that fateful night in the hospital, and the change in him was remarkable. Gone was the cantankerous old man, replaced by someone I'd grown to love and respect deeply. "Ready for this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Benjamin's eyes twinkled with a mischief I'd come to recognize. "Oh, I'm more than ready, my dear. Let's give them a show they'll never forget." As we pulled up to Clara's house, my stomach churned with anxiety. This was the first time we'd all be together since Ethan left. The children were spending the day with a friend, sparing them from what I feared would be an explosive family reunion. Clara answered the door, her smile faltering as she saw Benjamin standing tall beside me, no cane in sight. "Dad, you're walking so well. Amazing what proper care can do." Benjamin replied, his tone deceptively light. Ethan appeared behind his mother, his eyes widening at the sight of us. "Becca? We weren't expecting you both." "Clearly," I said, brushing past them into the house. The atmosphere in the living room was thick with tension as we all settled in. Sarah and her husband Tom exchanged nervous glances while Clara fussed unnecessarily with refreshments. Finally, Benjamin cleared his throat. "I suppose you're all wondering why we're here." "To be honest, Dad, we're just happy to see you doing so well," Sarah said, her voice tinged with guilt. Benjamin's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Oh, I'm doing more than well, Sarah. Thanks to Rebecca here, I've not only recovered, but I've had a revelation." The room fell silent, all eyes on Benjamin. My heart raced, knowing what was coming. "You see," he continued, his voice gaining strength, "these past months have been enlightening. I've seen who truly cares about family, about legacy, about doing what's right." Ethan shifted uncomfortably. "Grandpa, if this is about us leaving—" "This is about so much more than that, boy," Benjamin cut him off. "This is about character, about who has the strength to stand by family, even when it's difficult, even when it's inconvenient." I watched as realization dawned on their faces. Clara's hand flew to her mouth, while Ethan's jaw clenched tightly. "What are you saying, Dad?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. Benjamin's eyes met mine, a silent question. I nodded, encouraging him to continue. "I'm saying," he said, turning back to his family, "that I've made a decision about the future of our family business. As of today, I'm naming Rebecca as the new head of Thompson Industries." The explosion was immediate. Clara leapt to her feet, face flushed with anger. "You can't be serious. She's not even blood." "She's more family than any of you have been," Benjamin shot back. Ethan turned to me, his eyes blazing. "You planned this, didn't you? This was your game all along." The accusation stung, but I held my ground. "The only game here, Ethan, is the one you and your family have been playing, abandoning your grandfather, abandoning our marriage." "Our marriage?" he scoffed. "You pushed me away. Enough!" Benjamin's voice boomed, silencing the room. "My decision is final. Rebecca has shown true strength of character, true commitment to family. She's earned this." As the reality sank in, I watched the faces around me contort with a mix of shock, anger, and betrayal. Sarah was openly weeping, while Tom looked like he might be sick. Clara stood rigid, her eyes burning with fury. But it was Ethan's expression that hit me hardest. The man I had once loved, the father of my children, looked at me with such hatred that it took my breath away. In that moment, standing amidst the chaos we had unleashed, I realized there was no going back. The family I had married into was irreparably shattered, and I, Rebecca Thompson, once the outsider, now stood at its center, holding the reins of a legacy I never asked for. As Benjamin's hand found mine, squeezing it in solidarity, I took a deep breath. The storm had broken, and I was at its eye. Whatever came next, I knew one thing for certain: nothing would ever be the same again. The weight of responsibility settled on my shoulders like a heavy cloak as I strode through the doors of Thompson Industries. My heels clicked against the marble floor, echoing in the suddenly hushed lobby. Employees whispered and stared, no doubt wondering about the woman who had seemingly appeared out of nowhere to take control of their company. I straightened my spine, channeling every ounce of confidence I could muster. This was my world now, whether I was ready for it or not. As I reached my new office, Ethan's old office, I found Benjamin waiting for me, a proud smile on his weathered face. Ready to shake things up, Rebecca? I nodded, my throat tight with emotion. As ready as I'll ever be. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of meetings, decisions, and late nights. I threw myself into learning every aspect of the business, determined to prove Benjamin's faith in me wasn't misplaced. But with every success came a new challenge, often in the form of resistance from longtime employees loyal to Ethan and his family. It was after a particularly grueling board meeting that I found Ethan waiting outside my office, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice softer than I'd heard it in months. Against my better judgment, I let him in. As soon as the door closed behind us, Ethan's composure cracked. "I've been a fool, Becca," he said, running a hand through his hair. "I let my family cloud my judgment, push me away from what really matters, from you." I stood frozen, my heart pounding. This was the moment I'd dreamed of for so long, Ethan coming back admitting his mistakes. But as I looked at him, I realized something had fundamentally changed. "I want us to try again," Ethan continued, stepping closer. "For the kids, for us. We can make this work. I know we can." For a moment, I wavered. The memory of our life together, the family we'd built, tugged at my heart. But then I thought of Benjamin, of the trust he'd placed in me, of the strength I'd found within myself. "No, Ethan," I said, my voice steady. "We can't go back." His face fell, confusion and anger warring in his eyes. "What do you mean? Is this about the company? Because we can work something out." "It's not about the company," I interrupted. "It's about us. About who we've become." I moved to my desk, pulling out a manila envelope I'd been dreading and hoping for in equal measure. "I think it's time we made this official." Ethan's eyes widened as he realized what I was holding. "Divorce papers? Becca, you can't be serious." "I've never been more serious," I replied, handing him the envelope. "You're no longer part of my inner circle, Ethan. You made that choice when you walked out on us." His face contorted with rage. "You conniving bitch! You planned this all along, didn't you? Worming your way into Grandpa's good graces, stealing my company, my life." I stood my ground, even as his words cut deep. "I didn't plan anything, Ethan. I simply chose to stand by family when you wouldn't." "This isn't over," he snarled, snatching the envelope. "You'll regret this, Rebecca. I'll make sure of it." As the door slammed behind him, I sank into my chair, my hands shaking. I'd done it. I'd chosen my path, burned the last bridge to my old life. The finality of it was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. It was my assistant, looking worried. "Mrs. Thompson, there's an urgent call from your children's school. There's been an incident." My blood ran cold. In that moment, as fear gripped my heart, I realized the true cost of my choices. I had gained a company, but had I put my children at risk? As I rushed out of the office, Ethan's threat echoed in my mind. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. And suddenly, everything I had fought for seemed to be hanging by a thread. The day my divorce from Ethan was finalized felt like both an ending and a beginning. As I stood on the steps of the courthouse, the weight of the past year's struggles seemed to lift from my shoulders. I took a deep breath, savoring the crisp autumn air and the sense of freedom it brought. But my moment of peace was short-lived. My phone buzzed insistently, an urgent message from the office. Ethan and his family were making a last-ditch effort to wrest control of the company from me. They had called an emergency board meeting, claiming I was unfit to lead. I rushed to Thompson Industries, my mind racing. This was it, the final battle. As I entered the boardroom, the tension was palpable. Ethan sat at one end of the table, flanked by Clara and Sarah, their faces set in grim determination. The other board members looked uncertain, caught between the old guard and the new. "Rebecca," Ethan began, his voice dripping with false concern, "we've called this meeting because we believe the company is suffering under your leadership. It's time to return control to those who truly understand the Thompson legacy." I felt a flicker of doubt, but then I caught Benjamin's eye. He gave me a subtle nod, and I remembered why I was here. I straightened my spine and addressed the room. "Members of the board," I said, my voice steady, "I know there have been changes since I took over. Change can be scary, but let me show you exactly what those changes have accomplished." For the next hour, I laid out the company's growth under my leadership: increased profits, expanded market share, and improved employee satisfaction. With each point, I saw the doubt in the board members' eyes turn to interest. then admiration. Ethan tried to interject, his face growing redder by the minute, but I held my ground. This company isn't just about legacy, I concluded. It's about innovation, adaptation, and treating people, all people, with respect. That's the true Thompson spirit, and that's what I've brought back to this company. The room fell silent as the board members exchanged glances. Then, one by one, they began to nod. The vote was called, and the result was unanimous. I would remain as CEO. As the meeting adjourned, I watched Ethan and his family storm out, their last grasp at power slipping away. I felt a twinge of sadness for what once was, but it was overshadowed by pride in what I had accomplished. Later that evening, I sat in my living room surrounded by the warmth of my chosen family. Emma and Jack were curled up on either side of me, while Benjamin sat in his favorite armchair, looking more content than I'd ever seen him. "You did it, kiddo," Benjamin said, raising his glass of sparkling cider in a toast. "You saved the company and our family." I smiled, hugging my children close. "We did it together," I corrected him. "All of us." As I looked around at the faces of those I loved most in the world, I realized that this moment of peace, love, and triumph was what I had been fighting for all along. Not just a company or a title, but a true sense of family and purpose. The road had been hard, filled with betrayals and heartache, but it had led me here, to a place where I was stronger, wiser, and more fulfilled than I ever thought possible. "Mom," Emma said, looking up at me with curious eyes, "are you happy now?" I felt tears prick my eyes as I answered honestly, "Happier than I've ever been, sweetheart." And as the evening wore on, filled with laughter and love, I knew that this was just the beginning. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I was ready to face them, not as the woman I had been, but as the woman I had become. A woman who had taken adversity and turned it into opportunity, who had found strength in vulnerability, and who had learned that true family is not always bound by blood, but by love, loyalty, and shared struggles. This was my new chapter, my new life, and I couldn't wait to see where it would lead.